All right. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today on episode, what is this? This is the third episode, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Third episode of the 49th parallel. We've got some information to talk about what's going on within the trade war, what's happening on the Canadian side, what's happening on the American side, what happened in the markets. I mean, there's been complete pandemonium that took place on Thursday and Friday. And you have to
Yeah.
wonder if it's going to carry out on Monday. So, how are you today, Aaron?
Yeah. Um, Pretty good. I mean, I don't have anything in the stock market right now, fortunately. So, and I didn't get freaking wrecked like so many people did. But yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I had a margin account, so I had to like just close everything, just closed everything just so I didn't get a margin call. But it's
Yeah, totally.
it stinks when the market's that volatile. Um, yeah. So let me bring up some charts just to kind of illustrate what we're talking about. And
Yeah. Being the American side guy, you definitely take the lead on this American stuff. I have comments I can definitely make, but I think you know more about it. There we go.
yeah, so this is monthly candles, right? These are pretty, what you could see we were just marching along after Biden had interest during Biden's administration, interest rates were hiked. We could see that, we had this downwards action, which was pretty brutal, right? Like if you look
Yeah.
back, these were the previous bear markets we've had with equities, in 2018 right here, COVID, and then this one was one of the more brutal ones. And now we got right underneath the 200-day moving average, and we just completely dropped like a hammer. And you notice that this
Yeah.
flat look to the candle. That means
Yep.
that means that that's our price is at the lowest possible price. Also, you
Wow.
see these gaps here, which
Yes.
which is really bad. And there, part of the reason, like I was saying, was a lot of people have margin accounts, so they have to sell a lot to make sure that they don't get a margin call. But at the same time, there's really not that many buyers in the market. I mean, inflation, everything that's going on, there's not the same amount of buyers as there once was. So you could see,
Yes.
volume dipping off from where it was even back here. You could see volume
Yep.
was pretty steady, and then we dropped, and then we have big red volume, which means there's more sellers than buyers. So you know
Right.
that's
Right.
that's no good. That's no good. And then you look at Nasdaq. What's the Canadian what's like a Canadian ETF that's kind of like the markets for Canada? By any chance?
Um, I'd have to look it up.
That's all right. I'll just
It would.
I'll type
It
something
won't.
and
It won't
see.
take long.
All right. So Nasdaq's
Version
the same
of.
thing. Nasdaq's the
Yeah.
same thing. You see that we rolled underneath this 200, and then we just got completely shot down. We are at like a light level of support right here, but
Mm-hmm.
the next level of support's even further down at this 16,337. So, we may get some buyers, or we may get a short squeeze on Monday. So we may have a
Yeah.
bunch of people trying to short the market. So you might pump up a little bit, and then it looks likely that we're going to come down to these areas. So really
Right.
bearish looking action in the immediate short term, at least. Well, and I would assume into the midterms. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. Though the Canadian one, it's the TSX, which is the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is the equivalent to the Dow or the S&P 500. Um, it's like tracking the all the most actively traded Canadian companies on the Toronto
mhm,
Stock Exchange.
yeah,
Energy, mining, financials, yada yada. Yeah.
yeah,
Then you have what is this? The TSX Venture Exchange, which I'm not familiar with that. That's like it's kind of like a small cap Nasdaq type of a market. and then that's like tracking like junior companies and mining and energy, biotech, stuff like that.
I have the
Anyways,
S&P
it's a
TSX Composite Index and the SPTSX 60 ESG Index, and just the
okay.
TSX
Yeah,
Composite. Look how badly this completely got hammered. And then there's
right.
no rounding underneath this one. It just went right through like a waterfall. Um,
Yeah.
but it's pretty much very similar to the United States ETFs. I'll look at the 60. Yeah, and the other, they're pretty much the same. So, I mean, it's no good for markets all over. I'm seeing reports. A lot of people on X are trying to tell everybody, that this doesn't really affect the markets. The Fed is just going to print money and blah blah blah. Um, I really disagree with that. I mean, the Fed is looking at inflation. They're looking at certain metrics within the economy in order to print money and lower interest rates. So the idea that tariffs are going to lower inflation is not really, it's not going to happen. And Jerome Powell has already said this. If you listen to what Powell's saying, he's saying um, tariffs are going to raise inflation, and that might mean they have to hike interest rates even higher. So I wouldn't,
Oh
if
wow.
yeah, I wouldn't expect the Fed to be accommodative towards this market. The only saving grace for the Fed to be accommodating towards this market is if you have a liquidity crisis, you have credit spreads blowing out, which you do have that. So, maybe they
Yeah.
will start printing money, but it's not a good sign because you have inflation up high. They're saying that it's going to raise inflation even higher, and then you have
Hmm.
credit spreads blowing out. So,
Right.
should I cover what credit spreads are?
Please, I mean, I'd like to know more about it myself. Yeah.
Yeah, so a credit spread, let me find the chart. A credit spread is, so let's say Coinbase has a bond that's 30 years, and in 30 years you get 60% on whatever you lend them. You give them
Yes.
$1,000, and in 30 years, you get 60% off of the
Hmm.
$1,000, right? So
Hmm. Hmm.
they compare the Coinbase bond to something that's really uh, risk free, like treasuries or something to that effect, and that
Right.
difference is the spread. So a
Okay.
30-year treasury would be like 4%, and the Coinbase bond
Yep.
maybe 30%, and that's the
Yep.
spread. And the more it widens, the more cause of concern there is. And when you look
Mm.
at a chart of kind of credit spreads right now, you can see they're just blowing out. So
Wow.
corporations have to pay a high premium in order to borrow money, while the U.S. Treasury gets to borrow money cheap, and that's really no good for business, right? So that's
So this
indicating that
is
business.
yeah. I just wanted to comment because like maybe you're getting into the technicals, and for people that aren't as good at that, translation into like the kind of macro political, it's like Trump is, saying, "Oh, it's short-term pain," but the reality is it can wipe people out. It is wiping people out. Like it can wipe out entire businesses when you get big drops like this in the market, And this idea that it's like, "Oh, we got to do this." Like it's not a guarantee that anything that he's doing with these tariffs is going to work. It's speculation. Like he's acting as though this is going to work, but nobody really knows if, putting all these tariffs on that supposedly is to be used to bring manufacturing back into the United States is even going to work properly, or if people are going to jerk around for the next 4 years, if he can even like, stay in power with the Congress, when the next midterms come up, because if that happens, he's freaking toast. But like, a lot of companies that said that they were going to invest back in the United States the last time he was in power I think a lot of them just like dragged it out and then didn't actually follow through with stuff. They just waited until he was out of office and then they just stopped. So it's like a lot of projects got started to invest back in the United States and then they waited till he was gone and then they just freaking shut down the projects. So it's like people are saying stuff to kind of like appease him, and it's not clear that it's actually going to follow through because you can't stay in power long enough to frickin' make sure that these people follow through with what they say they're going to in business. Is that
Yeah.
accurate? Like it seems like that's the kind of shit that's going on. And like does that like I don't understand what his logic is. It's like he's just absolutely annihilating the market right now. And maybe it'll rebound, but he's taking a gamble with, you know, a lot of businesses' money that are, getting wiped out at this point. And if it doesn't turn around quickly, like he's toast. He'll lose all of his support, even amongst Republicans, or enough of it that he's going to lose all of his control. Anyways,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Well, I'll push back a little bit with some of what you
Okay.
said, but for the most part, yeah, this is like really bad for all Republicans, right? Because everyone elects Republicans, and then if they give it the worst market ever seen, then that they probably aren't going to elect a Republican again. So it's not going to.
Yeah.
There needs to be some leeway, right? And that's where I would like to push back with you about tariffs, right? That there is a constructive use to tariffs, and a lot of the world does use VAT taxes in
Oh, for
order
sure.
to
Yeah.
have like a way to kind of make income for the country or wherever. And
Yeah.
so just the idea of tariffs aren't necessarily bad. It's the way he's going
Yeah, I hear you.
about it. He's going to the extremes, and if you read his books, that's what he says you should do with like negotiations, which I don't necessarily think that's true. I think you need to find wherever works, right? And then you might add a little fluff to wherever works. And if the person just outright says no, then you come down to what works, and then you shake hands, right? You don't go to
Yeah.
the most extreme I can think of, right? So
Yeah.
um
Well,
yeah,
he's
that
operating from sorry, go ahead. You finish your point. Now that I'll kind of come back at it. Keep going.
well I just wanted to finish with the credit spreads though, because this
Okay.
this back here, this was, you look back in history, and if you look at like 2017, what happened was the credit markets just completely froze up, and that's when the Fed pivoted. So the idea that the Fed will pivot just to accommodate tariffs is not going to happen. But if the markets continuously get wrecked, they're going to have no choice but to get involved. But at the same time, they're going to do that juggling act we saw with Biden, where they don't necessarily want to, you know, uh, make an accommodative environment. They just don't want everything
Yeah.
to turn into Mad Max.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay.
So,
Okay. So yeah, yeah. Anyways, I mean, I guess coming back at that now, it's like the point is he's created chaos. Like you mentioned about how that is part of his business tactics is to like go full extreme and then bring it back down to something that's, reasonable, but that he can kind of get an edge on. And it seems it seems like okay, at a scale like even in his large businesses, maybe that works. But when you're dealing in global markets and it is like absolutely political in every sense of the situation, and you have people like literally attacking everything that you're saying, and they actually want you to fail. Like it seems to me like he operated in business where sure you have some enemies, you have some competition, but it's just doesn't seem like it's the same world. And it's like he's trying to operate the same as he did in his business world. where maybe it was relatively successful considering he is quite well off. But now that he's trying to use these same chaotic tactics at like a global stage, he's dealing with pretty sophisticated countries, economies, and stuff that he's trying to seemingly control. And it's like there's just cascade effects of chaos all over the place, and he doesn't seem to care that it's just wrecks people. I actually historically was quite supportive of Trump. I'm not American, but I liked a lot of the things that he talked about doing, but I did not expect for him to like do what he's doing now, especially against Canada. Like nobody was expecting him to go as like crazy on Canada about like tariffs and whatnot, and accuse us of all kinds of ridiculous crap. You know, it just seems wild. I just don't.
Yeah.
I am
So
just I'm almost speechless. I've been thrown for a loop by this guy because he just seems like he's totally gone into right field.
yeah, so if you go back you go back to 2008, right? Like what ended up happening is countries like China, they were impoverished, right? So
Yeah,
there was a deal that was made, and what part of the deal was China were to buy a lot of U.S. treasuries to support the economic crisis that we had. It was along with other countries, right? And they took the treasuries and we gave them business. And
yeah,
the idea was after a certain amount of time, China's economy would move from labor into a consumer economy. So the idea of tariffs and nationalism, of moving away from globalism, right? So that was like a globalization period. Right after
yep.
2008, we really amped up globalization. Not to say that it didn't happen prior to that, but after 2008, globalization really took course, and that's where you saw China really develop. Other countries really develop. Right, Vietnam would be another country that really developed, and now Trump is kind of in charge of this next paradigm of moving away from globalism into nationalism, and there is. You were asking if there was good parts to this. That would be the good part, right? Because we've kind of taken the pendulum and swung it way too far on the globalization side, and that's why we have
Mhm.
these crazy, you know, UN and World Economic Forums really like pushing um, uh, globalization type of outlooks on every country of laws. They're trying to implement the 2030 agenda. That's what they really try to push. And they've probably gone too far with it. So Trump's campaign was really like against those organizations and trying to make America great, right? You bring back jobs and manufacturing, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? Like a lot of people
Right.
will give it almost like a dirty connotation, but the truth is that the people are supposed to be proud of their country. They're supposed to have jobs. They're
Of course.
supposed to want to live in a country that they believe in, right? So,
Yeah.
that's not necessarily wrong. It's just the way he's going about it. Again, is
Right.
not necessarily a good way to go about it. Um,
Yeah.
I forgot. I had a. Was there anything you wanted to add? I have a document that I want to show at one point.
Yeah, we'll get into it more. I was going to kind of move into the stuff going on between Canada and the United States right now because, like, on April 2nd, we were supposed to supposedly have a whole bunch of tariffs added onto Canada, and most of them actually got backed off on, which is good. It was interesting because when he put out like the whole chart of tariffs, Canada actually wasn't on it. And then everybody's like, "Hey, what's going on?" Because, like, nobody even knew really what was happening until he actually announced those. Um, because he'd be like, "Oh, we're gonna put more on you, oh, but maybe we won't. Maybe we'll have carve outs, but probably not. We'll probably make you the 51st state." It was like literally, it was all chaos, right? So that anyways, we'll go into that a little bit more after, but yeah, it's really interesting what's happening right now. So, but go ahead, show that chart that you're gonna.
I was gonna say, I was just gonna add to what you were saying, right? It's almost like he's trying to pressure Canada into becoming the 51st state, and really,
Yeah,
there's no way to actually have Canada as a 51st state. You'd have to,
no,
bypass all the law mechanisms and everything. So this is Stephen
yeah,
Myron, and he is the senior advisor at Hudson Bay Capital. So this guy is
okay,
Trump's economic advisor. He's one of the top. There's the Council of Economics. He's Trump selected him for the Council of Economics, and
okay,
he pretty much gives restructuring the global trading system. So he gives a whole game plan on like how they want to go about doing all this stuff. And let me phase one. And part of this document, they talk about having an accord after all these like uh let me just yeah so they talk about having an accord, a currency accord, after the trading situation is kind of tamed. So let me just
hmm
quickly find it. Yeah, so right here. Tariffs are a tool for negotiating leverage as much as revenue and fairness. Tariffs will likely precede any shift to soft dollar policy that requires cooperation from trade partners for implementation, since the terms of any agreements will be more beneficial if the United States has more negotiating leverage. Last time, tariffs led to the phase one China agreement. Next time, maybe they will lead to a broader multilateral currency accord. And they go into they go into the phase one agreement, and they say that China agreed to the phase one agreement and then backed out. The part of the agreement was the intellectual property and everything. They backed out. And
right,
this time, after the agreement, they're talking about having a multilateral currency accord, which is like a Bretton Woods or like a
yeah,
1985's Plaza Accord, and they're
yeah,
kind of terming this the Mar-a-Lago Accord. So going back to what I was saying with
okay,
like 2008 and all this other things I was saying, well, part of what's going on, the reason why we're having all these problems is because of Triffin's dilemma. So as a reserve currency, the more money that's the global economy needs constant money being pumped into it. So as the U.S. has the reserve currency, they're the ones that are going to have to hold on to all the debt, but they have to accommodate every country. Yet at one point, they don't have the benefits like they once did. At one point, having a
right,
reserve currency is really beneficial, and then towards the end, it's not as beneficial. So now that it's not as
mm,
beneficial, now they're talking about having a multilateral currency accord, which
right,
I would assume is going to take in the trading data, what central bank's interest rate should be, um, just all the data that would come from each economy. And it's funny because a lot of that information is centralized. It's coming from the central bank, so you're going to see. This is where I think a lot of blockchain use cases are going to be integrated into a system like this. Not to mention AI use cases, because never
hmm
before did you have these tools, and now you're going to trust the People's Bank of China. You're going to trust the ECB. Like, why is anyone going to trust any central bank that's not theirs, right? There's going to be just economic warfare taking place, and they really need trustless types of protocols coming into play. So yeah.
yeah, interesting. Um, I guess I'll move in that other direction. Like, are you familiar with what's happening in with tariffs between the United States and Canada? It's in particular to do with the automotive tariffs, which is big industry here, obviously in the U.S. as well. And Trump would like to have more manufacturing come back to the states, and then a big part of his tariff kind of regime is to try and get pressure other countries to take the tariffs off of U.S. imports into their countries, right? Like into Japan, China, into European countries. Because historically, that is true. Like a lot of American vehicles were not really going into other nations because the tariffs are just too high, and regulations. Like they did all kinds of stuff to stop the U.S. From bringing vehicles into their countries. Meanwhile, America allows foreign vehicles to come into the United States for relatively cheaper prices in terms of taxes. I don't even know how much tariffs were on them, if at all. But are you familiar with any of that stuff, or
A little bit, not too
a
familiar.
little bit? Yeah. So, anyways, also, keep in mind, like there's a major tie between Canada and the United States on a lot of the auto sector because whenever they're building vehicles, they're like basically moving parts back and forth between Canada and the US like multiple times during the building of vehicles. And so there's like this interconnectedness that really is unlike a lot of other nations. And so Trump didn't realize that, I don't think, because when he started saying he was going to tariff us like crazy on the auto sector in particular, like a full out 25% tariff across the board, um, which he's still saying he's going to do it, and it's like this changes daily. That's why it's so freaking confusing. Um, but it's like to do that, it's literally like shooting yourself in the foot because they're the two countries are so tied together with the building of manufacturing of vehicles that it causes a problem for the American companies that are building these vehicles. Um, and they don't even I don't even know if they really understand what's going to happen. They're just like, this is so chaotic. The whole business is being like upended because of what Trump is talking about doing. So Canada has now said, like, because the US is like, we're putting a 25% tariff on all vehicle imports uh, from Canada, like anything to do with it. So then Canada's like, fine, then we'll just tariff you back the same amount. So it's just like, I don't know. It just seems, again, this is nuts. Like, I read about it like every week, but it keeps changing, so it's hard to keep up with what's happening. That's why I was wondering if you were familiar with it. So
Yeah,
we'll
so
see.
I mean, like, it's not so Canada's got a ton of natural resources, right? So,
Oh yeah,
I mean, you start
that's most of
tariffing
our
the
trade.
autos. Yeah, you start tariffing the auto sector, and then they recuperate by start tariffing potash and you know like just every natural
Lumber,
resource.
potash, freaking oil and gas. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really zero sum game he tries to play, and he doesn't realize that other countries have leverage as well. Not to mention, there's probably room for some type of negotiation which both sides win, right? Like if
oh,
Canada
absolutely.
doesn't complete the cars and they send them across to Michigan or Detroit, right? And Detroit
Yeah,
finishes the car and revamp the automotive sector there. But instead, when you start, right off the bat, saying that you're going to do 30% tariffs, um, then there's no there's no wiggle room. Yeah,
yeah.
so the one thing that came out though was how he got the numbers. So at one point, these
Oh yeah.
sophisticated economists came up with like how much each country should be tariffed, and he just threw it
Mhm.
all out and took like the trade deficit minus what the whatever, and then that's how much he charged each country. So trying to
It
get hit
seemed
for the
like it
high.
wasn't even that sophisticated. Like when I looked at the stupid signs, like look at this big beautiful sign I have here. When he was telling all the tariffs, it literally looked like it was just like whatever they were getting tariffed, they're just like, we're gonna do half of that and tariff you back with it. It's like you like wrote it down on a napkin and then just freaking said, we're gonna tariff all these countries half of what they're tariffing us. He's like, how is that not fair? That's perfectly fair. It's like, what? It's
Yeah,
like you don't even know the relationships for each country, why they're doing the tariffs in the first place, and then trying to negotiate with each country. It's almost like it's too complicated for him and his team to go through. And he's like, no, 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 get rid of all that. Let's just do 50% on everybody. It's just like bonkers. I can't imagine how his team feels. They probably do a whole bunch of work for him, and then he's like, "No, we're not going to do any of that. I'm just do half of whatever they're doing and put it on a nice big chart so I can brag about it." That it seems stupid, but that looks like what he's doing. Like
yeah,
almost like it's a joke. He's not serious or something.
yeah. So if a country has a trade surplus with the US or the numbering result from the above formula was less than 10%, then a flat rate of 10% was applied. So the reciprocal tariff applied to their trade deficit divided by exports to the US divided by 2. So that's how they came up with the number. So
Okay.
but they came up with, like I said, sophisticated formulas to begin with, and then just threw it all out. But even if they have a trade surplus, they're getting hit with 10%. So I mean, even if
Yeah.
they're doing good business with the US, they're getting hit with high rates.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I I I mean, it's a good thing that the U.S. has kind of slowed down and economic activity, because we had a high level of economic activity, and all of these goods and services and natural resources were being tariffed this high on top of it. Like, forget about it. Like, we would just have a big crash right afterwards.
Right. Yeah. It's weird because like I'm like in terms of free trade, I for the consumer, it seems like it would just be better in a lot of senses, and this is very first order, so excuse me, but it seems like the more free trade we have just in general, it's good for the consumer. It might not be always good for the companies in a particular country because, for instance, with dairy, that's a big one in Canada. We have this thing like the dairy cartel, and it's like mostly controlled out of Quebec, and they're trying to protect Canadian farmers, which it's a very small number, and it's shrunk over time since it was put in place, where you have like super high protectionism against the dairy industry in Canada. So we have this thing. What do they call it? They call it oh yeah, supply management in Canada, where we control the domestic production, which is supposed to stabilize the prices for the farmers that make and then sell these products. And then every company that does it, they have a quota that they can produce each year and sell that. They can't go over their quota. If they do, they have to basically destroy the milk or whatever different types of dairy. They have to get rid of it. So, and I think in the States it's different. It's almost like the States just directly subsidizes companies in the States that do dairy production. But anyways, we have two different systems of how we do it. Um, but it's more of like a quota system, and then you buy like a license to get those quotas in Canada. It's very, very controlled. It's hard to get into apparently. Whereas in the United States, I think it's just like direct subsidies to whoever are the producers. But there's like a ton of waste in that industry because of this. Because when you have cattle and they're producing all this product, they generally overproduce it. That's my understanding. So Canada doesn't want the United States or any other countries, whatever, but mainly the United States coming in and flooding the market literally because they just have you just have such a larger scale production capability than Canada in most sectors, but particularly in this dairy sector. The government in the US is subsidizing the companies to begin with, and they have way larger production, and they have fewer regulatory controls in the United States than Canada. So like we're very strict as to how we allow dairy production to take place. So, those are all aspects of what's going on. Now, typically I think that Canada would be able to survive if they have good product. and they, the companies that exist would have to really focus on having good product and do good branding and whatever, do good business in order to survive in that dairy market. Would the US mostly take that over? Yeah, they might. But who wins at the end of the day is the frickin' consumer. The prices are going to go down. That's the bottom frickin' line. Because if you have that much competition, the price is going to go down. It's going to allow people to have, a better standard of living, in the sense that all of that food is going to be much cheaper to purchase than within our controlled system that basically only these select Canadian companies can sell dairy. Now, obviously, me saying that would piss off a lot of farmers, but it is the reality. Like, if you create a free market where it is what it is, the market will adjust over time. So it's like the things that Canada would be better at, would produce better products and does it more efficiently. It will excel in those areas, because it's the idea that if we take off these protections, our country's going to get smashed. Initially, that might be true, but your country still has resources, it still has services, it still has brilliant people in it. Your market will just move towards the thing that make the most money and are the most efficient. Like,
Free
to me,
markets, free
that's
market
yeah, it's free
capitalism. So,
markets.
I
Yeah,
mean,
which
that's my
yeah,
biggest argument against this too. It's just anytime you have free market capitalism, you're going to have the best possible products at the cheapest possible cost.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm against anything that interferes with that. Even on the state side, that yours is more run harder, but even on the state side, like I read a story of like this Amish family that the feds came in and like just handcuffed them, came in with automatic weapons, put them on the ground, zip tied
Oh
them
my
all,
god.
and it was because of their milk. They didn't pasteurize their milk, so they all got
Yeah,
arrested, thrown in prison over it. Like how
yeah,
dare you?
yeah,
I really think the government should be working for us, not the other way around. We shouldn't be blind
yeah,
obeying what the government tells us to do. And free trade absolutely is the best possible thing for the consumer. And any type of government interference is a bad thing.
yeah. Yeah, typically, I imagine that there are outliers, like there's exceptions to the rule sometimes, but
Yeah, like child
depending on
labor,
what's
maybe,
yeah, like the
maybe.
thing that I get is, like, within China, they're really not free trade. They want our countries to be free trade and allow them in, but then they have massive protectionism on their side, and that's not fair. And that's where I do understand and agree with what Trump's trying to do. I'm not saying he's doing it right, but he's trying to do is break down those barriers by force. And it makes some sense, in that it's like China wants us to open up our market so that they can flood it with whatever, essentially cheap labor, in the sense that they can build things for so cheap there, then they flood the market. But then they won't allow us to go back into their market and sell product either. Or if you try to go and build businesses there, then they fricking steal all the IP, like all the intellectual property, right?
Even if you're
And
not building there, they'll just hack into your servers and take the IP and build it there anyway.
yeah, so that kind of stuff, that's a little bit more complex. I can understand why all countries that are like in the West are wanting to fight back against China that way, because China really isn't trying to play fair that way. Obviously, they want to dominate, um, but it just seems like they're pretty subversive in their tactics economically, but because they are so controlling. I mean, they're not they're not like a Western democracy,
There there's a
by
little
any
bit
by
of
any
like
stretch.
there's a little bit of propaganda and hyperbole mixed into all this though. Like for example, like you'll hear a lot of the politicians blame China for like fentanyl, right? You'll often hear
Mhm.
that, but that's not China
Yeah.
directing their pharmaceutical companies to, start working with the Mexican cartel. Those are criminals within China doing that.
Yep.
That's not China doing that. And a lot of people will try to make the difference. As far as the intellectual property is concerned, I'm not an expert in that matter, but I would assume a lot of the intellectual property that's getting stolen is for military applications, right? And what's fair in war. A lot of the semiconductors, those are all used in military applications. Those seem to be the most popular, like IP stuff that's stolen. But
Yeah.
I'm very sympathetic because you hear people talk about how they try to start businesses in China, and everything just gets stolen, everything gets taken from them. But I
Yeah.
don't know if that's the Chinese government directing people to do that, or if that's just their criminals
Well,
doing it.
probably depends on the business, like you said. But from what I've heard, and we could probably quickly research it, like my understanding is that when companies would get big, like quite big, then the Chinese government would come in and be like, "Hey, give us all your hard drives, give us like USBs. We want all your information." So then the what do you call it? Like the R&D side of companies that were building in the China, they pulled out those departments and then they put them in other countries and they only have the actual manufacturing inside of China because they don't want to have the government come in and be like, "Hey, give us all your freaking info." Um, so companies are getting a bit smarter that way in China, where they kind of split their company into pieces so that China doesn't come in with their government and try to take over. Like I've actually heard of actual departments, um, like CCP departments that get put into companies once they're large enough, where they're like, yeah, now we actually are calling the shots with this. Now, that's a little bit of hearsay. I'd have to like look up all the specific instances to see if it's just more of an edge case. But I mean, there's really no question. China's pretty freaking heavy-handed when they want control of stuff, or if a company gets too big, they want to control narratives coming out of the company. Um, a famous one is their own. What it is, Alibaba, with the Jack Ma guy that disappeared for like over a year because he like talked smack about the CCP government and like acted like he was untouchable. And then they like either they disappeared him or they threatened him and he just like left and then the government like took over the company. And then he came back later and he keeps his mouth shut now about the CCP. But yeah, you should check that out. Check out that issue with Alibaba because it was a pretty big one,
No, I
if you're
remember. I
familiar with
remember Jack
Alibaba.
Ma.
Yeah.
I remember Jack
Yeah.
Ma just disappearing. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think he's still alive, so I have checked up
Yeah.
on it. He is still alive, but if you live in a communist dictatorship, it's probably not a smart idea to start, um, talking smack about your government. I mean,
Yeah.
there's actually like so uh, a lo- China, a lot of Asian countries will celebrate, being part of the herd, being part of the group, and there's sayings like the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, those types
Yeah.
of ideas, and
Yeah.
there's actually like science behind it. Countries that appreciate individualism, you're going to be more creative, you're going to create more things, and the intellectual property is going to be a lot more, you know there's going to
Right.
be more just because the cultures are so
Right.
different. And you know industrialization is going to be something that they're going to be really good at. So there is
Yep.
science behind all of it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I would like to talk more about what Canada's doing just because we're in the middle of a freaking election campaign. Uh, you probably haven't kept up. You're so bloody busy with what's going on there. You're probably not too familiar with what's happening here, are you?
Um, I've looked here and there, but I'm not like extremely familiar. So fill me in.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're like, what are we in? Like a week and a half or so into our campaign, and they're not long. Like the campaigns only last like uh 30. I think he wanted as short as possible. I think it's like 37 days. That's how long the campaign is. And so April 26th is when we have the actual election day. So it's like not that far away. Um, so for those who aren't familiar, like on the US side, maybe some Canadians aren't aware either, but uh, Justin Trudeau was in power. He was in his kind of waning years because he was just like hated by Canadians. He was polling insanely low. I think the Conservative Party was like 35 points ahead in the polls just because people hated Justin Trudeau so much. So he eventually, even with his own cabinet, people were calling for him to resign. So eventually he did, but the sly dog, the way that he did it, like he wanted this Carney guy to come in and take over. So basically what he did was he resigned, but said that, well, I'm resigning, but I'm not resigning fully until, we pick our new leader, obviously, for the party, and then we'll see what happens then. But I'll resign once we pick a new leader. But then he picks Carney essentially. He didn't directly say that, but I'm pretty sure that that's what he wanted to happen because Carney is a globalist, the same as Trudeau, like hardcore. He's just more sophisticated. He's a World Economic Forum guy, Davos, like the whole thing. Used to work Goldman Sachs. He's like the atypical globalist shill, we'll call it. And with the World Economic Forum, he's worked with them for many, many years, yada yada yada. So and big into investing. Like I said, he was with Goldman Sachs, and then he was with a Canadian firm called Brookfield. I think it's called like Brookfield Asset Management or something, which you could look it up, but it's a pretty big one in Canada. Um, but anyway, so this guy was basically, ordained to be the next leader of the Liberals. Then he won like 86% of the vote within the Liberal Party. Um, and there was you could go into that. There's all these shenanigans with their own, in-party elections, but he ended up winning with like almost 90% of the vote. Then once that happened, Trudeau resigns, and then Carney de facto, here, you're the new prime minister. No elected, he's not elected by Canadians. He's just like, now he's the frickin' prime minister of Canada, which is wild, but it's not unprecedented. He's actually the 13th prime minister that has got into power through this mechanism. And that's happened throughout Canadian history on both the Conservative Party and on the Liberal Party. There are other parties, but Canada's basically a de facto two-party system like the States, even though there are technically other parties in our parliamentary system. So he gets into power, and then he, the timing was impeccable because Trump then comes after Canada, tells us we're going to be the 51st state. That was all based off of conversations that he had with Trudeau, where Trudeau said that if we don't tariff the United States sufficiently, we are basically, not a country anymore, which was a stupid thing to say. But, Trudeau's a weak leader. He always has been. So he says this to Trump. Then Trump's like, oh, well, then you should just be the 51st state then. Right. Like that's his immediate response, to which Trudeau's like, what does he do? So then he starts calling him the governor and all this stuff, like Governor Trudeau. And then it just kind of like snowballs from there. Totally ridiculous. But Trump's like, no, like you should. And then he starts making all these accusations about how we over tariff them, like over tariff the United States, which in some cases is true. We do have a surplus of between, I don't know, it's anywhere from 40 to $100 billion a year. Like it's not tiddlywinks. It's fairly significant, and it's consistent, but it's because we sell so many raw goods to the United States. We don't. The United States sells an insane amount of like services back into Canada, like refining of materials that get sold back. Like a good example would be the oil. So Canada sells like raw crude oil, like the thicker stuff from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and like 98% of our material goes down into the states. It gets refined in different states like Texas, and then they pump it right back up to us. They sell us back the same material that we gave them, because we don't typically refine our own material. So we sell it down to the states. The states then refines it and sells it back to us, or sells it to other countries at a premium. And because we give them such a good deal on it, they make lots of money. So there's areas where the United States makes lots of money off of Canada. It's just not always like a direct profiting. It's like indirect profiting through companies that are making money off of the goods that they're getting out of Canada. So yeah, it's a little bit different. It can be a little bit more complicated. So that's why I think that Trump is able to use this kind of like first order mindset where he's like, oh, you're tariffing us, you're not being fair. And it's like, it's more complex than that. So it's like, once you get to the nitty gritty of it, like the United States does pretty well. I just think the only thing that Canada could do better at is it could allow a little bit more states products to come in some of those big sectors like dairy, or um, like the tariffs that Canada was doing on aluminum, for instance, like steel and aluminum. Maybe that could have been dropped at least somewhat. Um, and then also what do you call it? The military spending. Like Canada is committed to do it. The states puts a lot of has a lot of weight on its shoulders to basically protect the freaking Western world, and Canada hasn't pulled its weight for probably like 10 to 15 years. And they keep saying that they will. In every trade agreement that we've had, we're always like, oh yeah, 2%, no problem, we'll do it. And then we never do it. And Trump called out Trudeau on it, fairly recently, and the guy frickin' just flakes, right? He like tries to dodge it, and then Trump's like, so how much are you spending? And he already knows. Like, how much are you guys spending GDP percentage on defense? And Trudeau's like, oh, we're aiming for 2%, 3% target. We're headed towards that. And then Trump's like, so what is it? And then they're like, oh, it's like 1.2, maybe 1.4. And Trump's like, so you're not meeting your target, not even close. And he's like, oh, well, we will. So I mean, Canada under Trudeau especially has done that for a very long time, and it's not acceptable. And that's where, so I'll bring this back around. Like, why does this matter? Well, we're in the election. Carney wants to fight. He wants to fight the Americans. He wants to fight Trump, because part of Canada's identity is that we're not American, which sounds really stupid, but that's like part of the Canadian identity is like, what's a Canadian? They're like, not an American. It sounds ridiculous, but there's this weird like strife that Canadians have against America, which is totally stupid, but they do. And so, especially in Eastern Canada, Western Canada, it's not that much, but in Eastern Canada, that's a big deal. And uh, the idea that he would try to take over the country, that was like music to the liberals' ears, because then they can grab a Canadian flag, put it over them, drape themselves in the flag, and just be like, we are patriots, we're gonna freaking protect our sovereignty. Whereas like for the past 10 years they've been selling us out to the globalists. They have literally the guy that leads the WEF bragging about how he's penetrated the cabinets. You can go look it up on YouTube. What the frick is the guy? He sounds like a total Nazi. He's like the head of the WEF. He has this famous line where
Oh,
he's
God.
he's bragging. Yeah, he's bragging about not taking over, but penetrating the Canadian cabinets of the biggest parties, especially the Liberals, because you had like Justin Trudeau sitting on there, Carney was sitting on there, Chrystia Freeland, which was like deputy prime minister. She was like directly tied into the WEF, and like they're taking like policy stances based on things that are hashed out at the WEF, and like Canadians didn't elect freaking people from the WEF. So what the heck are they doing? Like allowing these people to directly influence our policy without it being really known about it. And if people talked about it, they tried to make it like a conspiracy theory thing. So the Liberals were doing that for all this time. Trudeau literally saying we're the first post-national state with no core identity. He says that for frickin' 10 years. And then now that they're having this election, they're like, oh, we're sovereign, we're Canadians, give me a flag. We're going to frickin' fight against the Americans that want to take our country away. And they're just using it for political gain. That's it. And once this, I think Trump might know that. And so he's like, man, I'm just going to go with the Liberals because I can get more out of them later because they really don't care that much about their own country. They will sell out the Canadians, whereas the Conservative Party leader is a patriot. Some people don't like him, but he does want Canada to succeed on the global stage. And his policies haven't changed basically his whole career. He has the exact same talking points his whole career. That's Pierre Poilievre. So it's not like he's flip-flopping. People know who he is, they know what he stands for, and he's a tough leader. And I don't really think that Trump wants him to get into power because he will actually stand up for Canada on the trade front and everywhere else. Um, so yeah, it's interesting to watch the dynamics of what's going on, and the polls have flipped. It's very tight race right now, even though Polyev is way more like has a much more enthusiastic voter base. He's getting thousands of people at rallies in Canada. It's not like he's pulling like Trump was. Obviously, we're a much smaller country, but he's getting like 4, 5, 6,000 people at a rally, which is pretty substantial in Canada. That really has never happened before for any political leader here. And meanwhile, the Liberals like Carney under the Liberal banner, he might get 1,000 people on like the absolute biggest rally he can pull, but most of the time he can't fill a freaking bar or a pub or a small venue. He just struggles to do it. So it's interesting to see what's playing out here and like how they're doing it. And Carney is literally saying like our relationship with the US as we know it is over. He's full of crap. He's absolutely full of crap. The moment that he becomes leader, it'll go right back to the same as it always was. 1,000% guaranteed. He will just roll over and do what he's told to do because personally he gains from it. Like because of his assets that he has in the United States with Brookfield, which he moved the freaking headquarters there right before he became leader. He moved the headquarters from Toronto to New York, right? Like just before he became the leader, and then supposedly put all his stuff into a blind trust. We don't know who the blind trust is with. You don't tell anybody, but the guy's gonna sell out. He's been a sellout his whole freaking life. So, anyways, there you have it.
I like
There's my
Pierre too.
long rant.
Yeah, I liked Pierre too. If I was Canadian, I would vote for him. Just
Yeah.
everything that I've heard him say is he sounds like a libertarian, and that's kind of what
That's kind
I
of
gravitate
his
towards.
roots are more like libertarian slash conservative. Like he's just kind of basic economics, more right leaning economics, free markets, very common sense type stuff. And people be like, oh, he's a MAGA guy. It's like there is no MAGA in Canada, man. Like it doesn't, it's like super, super fringe to have people that are, more this mindset like MAGA. It just doesn't really exist. Like Canada is very left leaning, very like hybrid, democracy, socialist kind of policies. mixed with free markets, like much more so than the United States. Obviously, the biggest stuff being our healthcare system, but you see it in lots of the industry. Like we don't really have. There's no Republican Party in Canada. That's just like a ridiculous notion. Doesn't exist. So I would say the Conservative Party in Canada is kind of like the Democrat Party that's more kind of center. Like that's it. There
Does
is
one
no
side have
real
a
right wing.
feeling? Does one side have a feeling about guns than the other?
Yeah, I mean they do. And I mean our guns are quite restricted in Canada. Like we don't have any like concealed carry stuff. That doesn't happen. We can have restricted firearms like many of us have restricted firearms licenses where we can have like semi-automatic weapons and stuff like that. But the stuff that's really uh taken a big hit is handguns here. Handguns have always been very strict. Like I don't own one, I can, but they're virtually impossible to deal with now since Trudeau is like cranked down on the laws with them. It's very hard to get a handgun and actually use it in any, relatively easy way. It was always difficult, but now under Trudeau it's almost pointless to do it. Whereas uh Polyev has said that he will loosen the gun laws back up because Trudeau basically wants to take all the guns away under the guise of, all the crimes that are happening, which is total bullshit. The crimes that are happening are like mostly gang related in Eastern Canada. That's what it's coming from. And the guns aren't even Canadian. The guns come in over the US border illegally, like, and then the gangs use those guns to commit crime with. And like that's what most of the shootings that are happening in Eastern Canada, and it has gone up quite a bit. It's happening because of that. So there should be more border
Oh,
protections. And like, yeah, it's the criminal activity that's happening. That's it. But they're taking away all of the guns, not all, but they're taking away a lot of the rights for us that like live in rural Canada and we shoot coyotes or we shoot deer or we do sport shooting, with different types of guns and yeah, it's gotten much worse. So Polyev is far more like pro gun, I guess you could say. I wouldn't even really call him that. He's just like, could we please have some common sense here? Like you're punishing law-abiding Canadians that go through a very strict process. It's not the United States. It's extremely strict. And then you still want to like tell them they can't have their guns? Like it's ridiculous. Yeah.
yeah,
Anyways.
that's nuts. I mean, especially considering like most of Canada is rural, right? Like
Yeah.
you need
Yeah.
to have guns there since
Yeah.
I mean, uh, Texas, like most people are able to get their concealed carry here. So there is quite a few people. You go to the store and people have guns on their hips. They're not.
Right.
Everybody has a gun.
They're not just like
And
they're
then
just like pulling guns and shooting people though, right?
yeah, all right.
you
Well, I
know.
mean, in the gang areas they are, but not
Yeah.
anywhere near me. Everybody's
Right.
everybody pretty safe with their guns and but I will admit it's from somebody that's a transplant from New York. It's kind of shocking to
Oh,
see some people's arsenals. It's like almost like
really?
holy shit, like you're
Yeah.
preparing for the zombie apocalypse. You got just racks and racks and racks of things that look like machine
Crazy.
guns. One
Yeah.
one thing I just want to add is, all right, let's say all these tariffs work and you start bringing industry back to the United States. What that because you're gonna have to pay every worker that comes into these factories, and China doesn't have a minimum wage. We do. We've got
Right.
OSHA. We've got to do health insurance and taxes
Yeah.
and all these expenses that nobody else has to pay. So the cost
Right.
of goods and services are going to be a lot more than whatever the tariffs are. Like you got
Yeah.
20%, 35% tariffs for Chinese goods. Okay, But when you
Yeah.
create a widget in the United States, it's probably going to be like 12 6x, 6x, 12x,
Yeah.
whatever the price is. Like
Yeah.
nobody's going to buy it
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Not unless they're rich,
Or what
you
I'm
know.
thinking is they're gonna really push for like automation and like robotics and things to kind of replace the worker. But then it's
Yeah.
what does it matter if it's in China or if it's here, right? Like
Right.
there's no people working those machines. It's all robots
Right.
working it. So what's there's nobody getting paid from it. Nobody's producing and giving to the economy. I don't
Yeah, good
know.
point. Yeah,
So
technology is the way, man. I mean, the States has always been good at innovating, and Canada, for that matter, has always been good at innovating with technology. I feel like it should be more the focus into the future. Like technology is everything, and like people do get like freaked out about oh, they're going to displace workers with robots or with AI or whatever, quantum computers or whatever the newest technology is. People freak out. Oh, we're gonna lose all these jobs, but it's like you have to keep in mind there will be initial disruption, but that then the market becomes more efficient and people have to transition to other jobs, that still could be in those industries, but it's like they have to leverage their knowledge that they have and then move into a sector that they can leverage the new technology. And that's how our countries stay ahead over time. And like a silly example, but it's true. It's like the classic. There's two of them, like um, cars and horses in the old days. Like horses were everything. The whole market's like based off of having freaking horses do everything, whether transportation and work, recreation, like everything is based off of those friggin' animals. And then it was
horsepower.
so this is a really silly example, but in big cities where there was these horses, literally the shit piles up, the pee piles up, and it's just like disgusting. So like they have to clean all this stuff constantly. People actually like the cars because you know they're more consistent once they could get them running. They don't poop and pee. You don't have to service them like you do with the horse and keep them fed and watered through through the seasons. So the technology literally got better for these different types of things, and there were people railing against it, saying like this is going to ruin the industry for farriers or for people that use horses for various different things. Yeah, it happens. Technology makes the market move on. So did people lose jobs? Yeah, obviously, but that's happened throughout all of our history with the free market doing what it does. And when you try to like protect a market and force it not to uh how do you say, like, progress, it actually stifles you because the other countries that do progress, they get ahead of you. And now you're in trouble. So it's like trying to like use the government to force industries not to progress. And Trump might be doing that. This is like the irony is like he wants all this manufacturing for people to like go into a manufacturing facility and work with their hands instead of like trying to focus on using technology to help the American people get into new industries and leverage that technology to get ahead of everybody else. Canada does similar stuff, but I think I think long term that's a bad idea. Like, do you have any pushback on that or?
Um, no, I don't have any pushback on that. I think you're absolutely right. I think we should be embracing technology, and if we don't, we're going to get our lunch eaten by other countries, and you pretty much
Yeah, agreed.
hit the nail on the head. And before we finish though, I'd just like to make it clear that I by no means dislike Trump. As a matter of fact, I think he's
Yeah,
hilarious. I like
yeah, for
his
sure.
personality, but
Yeah,
I just am not a fan of destroying markets for the sake
Agreed.
of your
Yeah.
ego. And
Yes.
a lot of what I'm seeing is like almost it's almost like a storybook of somebody that has like a big ego and they're about to fall on their face and get humbled. And like that's what really fears me about him. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's all I'd like to. I would have voted for him if if I voted, but
Yeah.
I would have voted for him because I did like the first time he was in office. He pumped up the markets, and I was a fan of that. So now that he's not doing that, obviously, I have a problem with it.
Right. And we'll see what happens. I mean, could it turn around? Yeah, sure. It could turn around. I don't want to like say like I'm certainly not like an anti-Trumper or something. I'm not even an American, but like typically I liked a lot of his stances towards more like some of the social stuff. Like he was really against the political correctness movement, which people call it like wokeism or whatever. Basically, it's just like a hyper political correctness, which I mean, I'm glad that he spoke out against that and it actually gave people courage to speak out against it. Even though some people would get canceled for just kind of speaking their mind so that you could have open conversations and basically it didn't matter which side you would be on, you should be able to just like argue against stuff and like not feel like you're going to get canceled based on your position, which unfortunately a lot of the people in the left leaning parties particularly, but it's on the right as well, but it's very strong on the left in both the United States and Canada, that he pushed back against that so hard, at least it kind of has allowed people to wake up a little bit more in terms of the importance of making sure that you're able to talk. And he takes that to a whole new level, which is like gets pretty insane. But nonetheless, it's kind of given people the courage to speak up a little bit more about their opinions, and I do appreciate that from him. And I think that even people on the left that hate Trump could at least reluctantly say, like, yeah, fair enough. Like, if anything, he will say what he wants to say and he doesn't give a shit what other people think about it. And it's kind of like an admirable quality. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I have a couple buddies that like hate Trump. You know who they are. They like hate Trump with a passion. Like he's literally like evil to them. And I don't really think of him like that. I don't really I think that he does some good things and he does some bad things and it is what it is. But anyways, all that to say, like I don't think either one of us are like partisans, although we might lean one way or another on different issues. It's like I don't really care who the person is as long as their policies seem like they're reasonable. Um, and lately, it doesn't seem like what Trump is doing is reasonable, and we got to call it out. If he does stuff that we think is stupid, we're not like freaking disciples of some some cultic religion here. So, anyways,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, what you said, especially like, the whole cancel culture, people losing their
right,
jobs because somebody that identifies as a squirrel is being referred to as a her or him, and they lose their
right.
job over it, That's
Yeah,
nuts.
that's bonkers. Yeah,
Insanity.
yeah. No pun intended for the squirrel.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
I, we're gonna close it up. We got past an hour
Yeah,
this time. We're gonna shoot for like around an hour each time. I hope everybody enjoyed the show, and thanks for joining us.
yeah. Thanks, everybody. Later.